when fame ends in tragedy. They were adored, envied, immortalized on magazine covers and silver screens. Some were at the peak of their careers. Others were making long-awaited comebacks. And a few were just one role away from superstardom. But for all their fame and fortune, none of them saw it coming. A small oversight, a sudden shift in weather, a prop that failed, a machine that malfunctioned, and in a flash, everything ended. Not because of sickness, not because of age, but because fate had other plans. Tonight, we take you on a journey into the most shocking, freakish accidents in entertainment history. Each story is a chilling reminder. In the end, not even stardom can shield you from fate. 1. Brandon Lee, the prop that should have been blank. He was born into a legend, the son of Bruce Lee, martial arts icon and global phenomenon. But Brandon Lee didn't want to inherit his father's fame. He wanted to earn his own. In the early 1990s, he was doing just that. At 28, he had landed the lead in The Crow, a gothic revenge film where he played a murdered musician who rises from the dead to avenge his fiancée. It was his breakout role, and tragically, his last. Off-screen, Brandon was introspective, almost shy. He had just proposed to his longtime girlfriend, Eliza, and the couple was planning their wedding. The set of The Crow was intense, full of late nights and complicated stunts, but Brandon was thriving. He believed the film would change everything. And it did, in the most horrific way. On March 31st, 1993, during the filming of a shootout scene, Brandon was supposed to be shot with a prop gun. The weapon, improperly prepared, contained a real bullet fragment lodged in the barrel. When fired, it struck Brandon in the abdomen. At first, the crew thought he was acting. Then they saw the blood pooling. He was rushed into emergency surgery, but after 6 hours, he was pronounced dead. He never made it to his wedding, never saw the final cut of the film that would immortalize him. The studio completed The Crow using stand-ins and digital effects. It became a cult classic, but for many, it's unwatchable. Too much pain behind the beauty. He was finally stepping into his own light, one co-star recalled. And then it went dark. 2. Anton Yelchin, pinned by the machine that failed him. He wasn't the loudest actor in the room, but he didn't need to be. Anton Yelchin's talent spoke volumes. Whether in indie dramas like Crazy or as Chekhov in J.J. Abrams' rebooted Star Trek franchise, Anton radiated intelligence, empathy, and quiet charisma. He was the kind of actor who made you lean in, who gave small roles depth and nuance. Born in Leningrad to professional figure skaters who fled the Soviet Union, Anton was an only child and the center of his parents' world. He played guitar in a punk band, wrote poetry, took haunting black and white photographs. He didn't want celebrity. He wanted art. But on June 19, 2016, the world lost him in an accident so bizarre it seemed almost unreal. Anton's Jeep Grand Cherokee, parked on an incline outside his Los Angeles home, suddenly rolled backward. It pinned him against a brick pillar and a security fence, crushing his chest. He died within minutes. He was just 27. The vehicle had a known design flaw, a confusing gear shifter that often failed to indicate whether the car was truly in park. The recall notice from the manufacturer arrived at Anton's home 7 days after his death. There were no drugs, no recklessness, just a moment, a machine, and a tragedy no one could reverse. His parents later said, "We escaped a system that crushed freedom, and here, in this land of opportunity, a machine crushed our son." In the aftermath, Anton's foundation was launched to support young artists. His final performances were released posthumously, but his absence lingers, not just as a talent lost, but as a warning. 3. Vic Morrow, a war scene that became real. Vic Morrow had the face of a soldier, rugged, serious, and worn with experience. In the 1960s, he became a household name playing Sergeant Saunders in Combat, a gritty World War II television drama. He wasn't a flashy actor, but he was authentic, grounded. And in Hollywood, that kind of presence never truly disappears. By the early 1980s, Vic was seeking a comeback. He signed on to Twilight Zone, The Movie, an ambitious anthology film directed by 4 up-and-coming filmmakers, including John Landis. Vic's segment cast him as a bigot who finds himself transported through time, experiencing the horrors of war from the perspective of the oppressed. The final scene was complicated, a nighttime shot with pyrotechnics, a low-flying helicopter, and 2 child actors. It was meant to be dramatic, Vic's character running through a war-torn village while carrying the children, fleeing an enemy helicopter. But then the chaos turned real. On July 23, 1982, the helicopter flew too low. A sudden explosion from the pyrotechnics destabilized it. The rotors clipped a crane and came crashing down. In a matter of seconds, Vic Morrow and the two children were dead. Vic was decapitated. The children, 6 and 7 years old, were crushed. The tragedy exposed appalling violations. The children were working illegally at night without the required permits. Landis and several crew members were charged with involuntary manslaughter. No one was convicted. In his final moments, Vic reportedly held the children tightly, whispering that everything would be okay. He was wrong. The footage exists, but has never been released. It remains one of the darkest chapters in Hollywood history, a reminder that even the most crafted illusion can collapse into horror. Top 4. Steve Irwin, the Stingray's deadly strike. He was a whirlwind in khaki. With boundless energy and a thick Aussie accent, Steve Irwin made the wild seem wonderful. Known as the Crocodile Hunter, he brought reptiles, snakes, crocs, even venomous spiders right into viewers' homes, always with a grin and a heart full of awe. His motto? Danger, danger, danger. But he never treated wildlife with fear, only respect. Off camera, Steve was a husband, a father, and a conservationist. He built Australia Zoo with his wife Terry and taught his children, Bindi and Robert, to love the natural world the way he did. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing connection between humans and animals. But on September 4, 2006, that passion cost him everything. While filming Ocean's Deadliest, Steve was snorkeling in chest-deep water off the coast of Queensland. As he hovered over a large stingray, the animal suddenly whipped its tail upward and drove its barb into Steve's chest, directly into his heart. He pulled the barb out, but it was too late. He died within minutes. He was 44. Stingray attacks are rare. Fatal ones? Almost unheard of. Steve's death was called a 1-in-a-million tragedy. The footage was reportedly recorded, but out of respect, it was destroyed. His team never wanted the world to remember him that way. The memorial drew millions of grieving fans. His daughter Bindi, then just 8, delivered a eulogy that silenced a nation. Steve died doing what he loved, Terry later said, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. His legacy lives on, not in how he died, but in how fiercely he loved life. Tasht 5. Isadora Duncan, strangled by her own scarf. Long before the age of pop stardom and paparazzi, Isadora Duncan danced barefoot across the stages of Europe, her movements a rebellion against tradition. She rejected the rigid formality of ballet in favor of free, expressive movement, arms flowing, feet gliding, like she was carried by wind. Her performances were spiritual, wild, and defiant. She wasn't just a dancer. She was a force of nature. But her life was marked by haunting loss. In 1913, her 2 young children drowned in a freak accident when their car rolled into the River Seine. Isadora never fully recovered. Her art became more intense, her public image more erratic, and her appetite for danger, it seemed, more reckless. She moved to the south of France, broke, aging, and still clinging to her ideals. On September 14, 1927, in Nice, she climbed into a friend's open-top sports car, wearing her signature, a long, flowing silk scarf. As the car sped away, the scarf caught in the wheel spokes. In an instant, it yanked her backward, snapping her neck and hurling her from the vehicle. She died on the spot. She was 50. The image of her scarf, once a symbol of artistic freedom, becoming the instrument of her death, was almost too poetic to believe. Reporters seized on the irony. Artists mourned her like a fallen goddess. Her final words were said to be, "Farewell, my friends. I go to glory." And so she did, in the most theatrical, devastating way imaginable. To this day, no dancer has ever died in a more surreal and tragic fashion. 6. John-Erik Hexum, a joke that turned deadly. He had the face of a matinee idol and the body of an action star, tall, chiseled, with a smirk that made casting directors lean in. John-Erik Hexum was Hollywood's next big thing in the early 1980s. At just 26, he had already starred in Voyagers and was filming Cover Up, a primetime drama where he played a secret agent posing as a model. He was charismatic, easygoing, and known for goofing around on set to lighten the mood. But on October 12, 1984, that carefree charm became a fatal miscalculation. The cast had been waiting for lighting changes. Growing bored between takes, John-Erik picked up a prop .44 Magnum revolver loaded with blanks, intended for a later scene. Smiling, he pressed the gun to his temple and pulled the trigger, joking about Russian roulette. What he didn't know, and what most people don't, is that blanks, though bulletless, still release explosive gas and paper wadding with tremendous force. At point-blank range, it's lethal. The blast fractured his skull and drove bone shards deep into his brain. He collapsed instantly. After 6 days in a coma, his mother made the decision to remove him from life support. He was declared brain dead at 26. Hollywood was stunned. A rising star, extinguished not by drugs or violence, but by a moment of irreverent boredom. His organs were donated. His funeral was private. His legacy? A tragic reminder that even pretend weapons can kill. As one crew member said, he laughed, and a second later, he was gone. #7. Carol Wayne vanished after a walk on the beach. In the 1960s and 70s, Carol Wayne lit up late-night television. As the matinee lady on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, she played the blonde bombshell, breathy, glamorous, and always dressed in satin. But behind the teased hair and hourglass figure was a woman desperate to be taken seriously. Off-screen, Carol was far more complicated. She'd trained as a dancer, dreamed of film stardom, and longed for roles that didn't reduce her to a joke. But Hollywood typecast her, and by the 1980s, her career was fading fast. Divorced, burdened by financial troubles, she sought refuge in the company of powerful men. In January 1985, Carol vacationed in Mexico with a shady Hollywood companion. After what some witnesses called a tense argument, Carol reportedly went for a walk along the beach to clear her head. She never returned. Days later, her body was found floating in a shallow bay near Manzanillo. The autopsy showed no signs of trauma or drowning, only elevated levels of drugs and alcohol. Officially, the death was ruled accidental, but the circumstances remained suspicious. Her companion returned to the U.S. alone and refused to answer questions. No charges were filed. She was 42. Friends were devastated. Carol was fragile, one said. She wanted more than what Hollywood gave her. And in the end, it gave her nothing. A woman known for laughter, gone under a veil of mystery. Not murdered, not forgotten, just 8. Owen Hart, death in front of a live audience. He was born into wrestling royalty. Owen Hart, the youngest son of legendary promoter Stu Hart, was a natural in the ring, agile, technically brilliant, and endlessly charismatic. While his brother Brett became the hitman, Owen was the high flyer, the prankster, the underdog fans couldn't help but root for. By 1999, Owen had reinvented himself as the Blue Blazer, a satirical superhero character meant to poke fun at the flamboyant world of wrestling. At the Over the Edge pay-per-view event in Kansas City, he was set to make a dramatic entrance, descending from the rafters on a harness and cable system, parodying other wrestlers' over-the-top antics. What happened next was no parody. As 16,000 fans looked on and millions watched on TV, Owen's harness release malfunctioned. He fell nearly 80 feet, landing chest first on the ring ropes. It was instantaneous. The arena fell silent, the broadcast cut to black, and backstage, chaos erupted. He was just 34 years old. Despite attempts to revive him, Owen was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. The show controversially continued that night, a decision still debated to this day. His widow, Martha, later sued the WWE and reached a settlement. She never allowed him to be inducted into the company's Hall of Fame. They turned a human being into a spectacle, she said, and then they let him fall. The stunt was never attempted again. For fans and colleagues, the ring was never the same. A man who made people cheer, gone in a moment of silence. 9. Tommy Cooper died laughing on stage. Tommy Cooper was unlike any other comedian. Towering at 6'4" with a red fez perched on his head and a booming, clumsy presence, he specialized in magic tricks that went hilariously wrong. His timing was impeccable, his persona chaotic, and his laughter infectious. In post-war Britain, he was a household name, beloved for turning failure into comedy gold. But behind the slapstick exterior, Cooper struggled with heavy drinking and a grueling schedule. His health was deteriorating. He ignored advice to slow down, insisting the stage was the only place he truly felt alive. On April 15, 1984, he was performing live on the variety show Live from Her Majesty's, broadcast across the UK. In front of a packed theater and millions of viewers at home, he launched into his routine. Then he wobbled, then collapsed, mid-joke, into the curtain. The audience roared with laughter, thinking it was part of the act. So did the host. Even the crew waited several moments, unsure. But Tommy wasn't getting back up. Stagehands dragged him behind the curtain as the show continued. Paramedics attempted to revive him, but he was pronounced dead of a massive heart attack. He was 63. For many watching, it was surreal. A comedian dying as the crowd laughed, unaware. A BBC executive later called it the most haunting moment of live television. He died exactly how he lived, in front of an audience, making them laugh. But this time, the joke was on fate. 10. Jennifer Nitsch, a fall no one heard. In 1990s Germany, Jennifer Nitsch was television royalty. Elegant, blonde, and magnetic, she became a fixture in hit dramas like Nur eine kleine Affäre and Die Straßen von Berlin. Her beauty earned her magazine covers, but it was her vulnerability on screen, that quiet fragility just beneath the surface, that made her unforgettable. Yet behind the fame, Jennifer battled demons few understood. She struggled with anxiety, isolation, and a creeping sense of disillusionment. Despite outward success, she felt cornered by an industry that constantly expected her to be perfect, poised, smiling, thin. The pressure hollowed her from within. In June 2004, Jennifer was staying at her parents' apartment in Munich. The details of that evening remain murky, but around midnight, she stepped out onto the balcony. Moments later, she fell 2 stories. Not from a high rise, but high enough to end everything. No note, no warning, just silence. She was 37. Initial reports labeled it an accident. Others whispered suicide. But the only certainty was her absence and the unbearable void it left behind. Her family, devastated, refused to speculate publicly. In a bitter twist, Jennifer had once said in an interview, "I am afraid of being alone, of being forgotten." Within weeks, tabloids moved on. Her roles faded into syndication. And another actress, just as blonde, just as bright, took her place on the next cover. Her fall wasn't just physical, it was existential. 11. Art Scholl vanished into the sky. Art Scholl wasn't just a stunt pilot, he was a daredevil with precision. With over 20,000 flight hours under his belt, he wasn't known for recklessness, but for mastery. His aerobatic performances stunned audiences across the US, and his aerial cinematography became the gold standard in Hollywood. If you needed breathtaking footage from the sky, you called Art Scholl. In 1985, producers of Top Gun did just that. They wanted a shot of a plane spinning out of control, something wild, immersive, and real. Art accepted the challenge, flying his Pitts S2 camera plane off the coast of Southern California. From the cockpit, he radioed, "I've got a problem. I've got a real problem." And then, silence. His plane spiraled into the Pacific Ocean and vanished without a trace. Neither his body nor the wreckage was ever recovered. He was 53. No one knows exactly what went wrong. Theories range from mechanical failure to weight imbalance caused by the onboard camera equipment. But the mystery remains. How could someone so experienced disappear so suddenly? The filmmakers dedicated Top Gun to him. But for fellow pilots, the tribute felt hollow. Art was meticulous, one friend said. If it happened to him, it could happen to any of us. He was filming danger, and it became real. The man who made planes dance in the sky was lost to the same heavens he loved, a professional to the last second, and then simply gone. 12. Brandon deWilde, the golden boy, crushed by iron. He was the angel-faced child actor who broke hearts in Shane, 1953, with his trembling voice and iconic plea, "Come back, Shane." At just 11 years old, Brandon deWilde became the youngest male ever nominated for an Academy Award in a supporting role. Audiences adored him. Critics forecast a dazzling future. But Hollywood has little mercy for child stars once they grow. As Brandon matured, the roles dwindled. His cherubic looks became awkward adolescence, then haunted adulthood. Though he continued acting in HUD, Blue Denim, and stage work, he battled addiction, depression, and the crushing weight of faded fame. He longed for a second act. It never came. On July 6, 1972, in Denver, Colorado, Brandon was driving to a rehearsal when his camper van collided with a truck. The vehicle flipped and pinned him underneath. He was rushed to the hospital, but died that evening from massive injuries. He was 30 years old. Some say he'd finally found clarity. had plans to revive his career, to go sober, to start again. All of that ended on the side of a road in a city far from the spotlight. There was no national tribute, no grand memorial, just silence. A boy who once captured America's heart, crushed by 2 tons of steel and by the invisible weight of expectations he could never outrun. As one critic later wrote, Brandon deWilde didn't die in that crash. He died the moment the cameras stopped caring. Mar 13. Martha Mansfield, devoured by the dress. In the early 1920s, Martha Mansfield was poised to become one of the silent film era's brightest stars. A dark-haired beauty with expressive eyes and magnetic screen presence, she had just wrapped her most high-profile role to date, starring opposite John Barrymore in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. At only 24, the industry was watching. She had it all: poise, popularity, and the kind of rare, restrained glamour that refused to shout. On November 29, 1923, Martha was on set in San Antonio, Texas, filming a Civil War drama titled The Warrens of Virginia. She had just completed her scenes for the day and returned to a parked car to rest, still dressed in full costume, a hoop-skirted gown of gauze and highly flammable fabric. Someone nearby struck a match. Maybe a cigarette. Maybe a careless gesture. No one knows for sure. What is known is that Martha's dress caught fire, and within seconds, she was engulfed in flames. Her co-star attempted to smother the fire with his jacket, and a driver threw a coat over her, but the damage was done. With severe burns over most of her body, Martha was rushed to the hospital. She died the next morning. She was 24. Hollywood mourned. The tragedy prompted a crackdown on costume safety. But for Martha, it was too late. She had been on the cusp and then consumed by the very costume that was supposed to make her a star. From rising flame to falling star, it took less than a minute. Hoff 14. Paul Mantz, killed by the desert itself. Paul Mantz wasn't just a pilot. He was the pilot. In Golden Age Hollywood, when a plane needed to dive, roll, skim mountain ridges, or thread between buildings, it was Paul they called. He flew for Air Force, 12 o'clock high, and the wings of eagles. His flying was poetry, controlled chaos that always returned safely to the ground. He'd survived crashes, storms, even World War II. Some joked he was invincible in the air. But arrogance in aviation has a price. In 1965, Mantz was hired to fly for The Flight of the Phoenix, a survival drama about downed pilots in the desert. The plane used, a cobbled-together, barely airworthy mock-up, was a character itself. Mantz knew it was risky, but he agreed to pilot it for a dramatic belly landing scene across the rocky Arizona desert. On July 8, 1965, with cameras rolling, Mantz began the descent, flying low, fast, and steady until a wing clipped a small hill. The plane shattered on impact, tumbling across the sand like a toy. Mantz was killed instantly, his body crushed by the cockpit. He was 62. Stunt flying changed after that. Hollywood had lost its greatest aerial artist. A man who had defied gravity for 3 decades was grounded forever by a single bump in the earth. His final logbook entry read, "No turning back, one shot. Let's make it count." He did, and paid with his life. 15. Jean Harlow, a sudden death in slow motion. She was Hollywood's original platinum blonde, a living flame wrapped in silk. With a smirk that could undo any man, and a husky voice that defied her age, Jean Harlow was the first blonde bombshell, long before Monroe. In the 1930s, she lit up the screen in Red Dust, Dinner at 8, and Bombshell, playing women who were both sultry and sharp. But beneath the glitter was a young woman in trouble. Harlow's life was marred by illness, a controlling mother, and a string of tragic relationships. Her husband, producer Paul Byrne, had shot himself just 2 months after their wedding. The studio spun the story into mystery. Jean smiled through it all, on the red carpet, on set, on cue. Then her body began to fail. In early 1937, while filming Saratoga opposite Clark Gable, Jean complained of fatigue and bloating. Studio doctors dismissed her symptoms as flu or nerves, but she was suffering from acute kidney failure, a death sentence in that era. On June 7th, she collapsed. Her face was swollen, her breath labored. She was rushed to the hospital but never recovered. She died days later at just 26 years old. Her final words, whispered to her mother, were, "I can't breathe, Mama. I'm dying." Clark Gable, who adored her, reportedly wept like a child. Jean Harlow was buried in a gown she wore in one of her films, pristine, untouched by the reality of her suffering. MGM finished Saratoga using a body double and voice impersonator. The blonde bombshell had vanished, not in fire or scandal, but in silence. A star whose brilliance burned out not in a crash, but in a slow, ignored decline. 6 Leslie Howard, shot down by the enemy. To many, he was the perfect English gentleman, refined, soft-spoken, and quietly heroic. Leslie Howard will forever be remembered as Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind, but off-screen, he was far more than a romantic lead. An intellectual, a patriot, and, if rumors are true, a man with secrets far beyond the studio lot. During World War II, Howard left Hollywood behind and returned to Europe. He made anti-Nazi propaganda films for the British government and traveled extensively, delivering lectures and rallying support. But it's what he was doing in secret that makes his death so mysterious. On June 1, 1943, Howard boarded a civilian aircraft, Boeing Flight 777, from Lisbon to London. Somewhere over the Bay of Biscay, German fighters intercepted the unarmed passenger plane and shot it out of the sky. All 17 aboard were killed. Howard was 50. Theories immediately bloomed. Some claimed the Nazis believed Winston Churchill was on the flight. Others insisted Leslie Howard was a spy. British intelligence never confirmed anything. The truth died in the waves, along with his body, which was never recovered. Hollywood mourned him as a gentleman actor lost in wartime, but those who knew him best whispered of something deeper. He played heroes, one colleague said. But in the end, I think he actually became one. A star gunned down not by scandal or accident, but perhaps by war itself. Tosh 17. Carl Alfalfa Switzer, a child star killed over $50. He was the cowlicked mischief maker of our gang, the freckled-faced Alfalfa with the off-key voice and wide-eyed innocence. In the 1930s, Carl Switzer was one of America's most beloved child stars. His singing made audiences laugh, and his antics made him unforgettable. But childhood fame is a curse Hollywood has never figured out how to cure. As Carl grew older, the offers disappeared. He struggled with the transition to adult roles, eventually leaving acting altogether. By his 20s, he was working as a dog trainer and part-time bartender, scraping together a living far from the spotlight. On January 21, 1959, Switzer got into a dispute with a man named Moses Stilts over a $50 reward he believed he was owed for returning a lost hunting dog. The argument escalated at Stilts' home. Switzer allegedly banged on the door, shouted threats, and may have brandished a knife. Moments later, Stilts shot him point-blank in the groin. Carl stumbled outside, collapsed on the steps, and bled to death. He was 31. The killing was ruled self-defense. Stilts walked free. The public barely noticed. There was no media circus, no formal tribute, just a faded former star dying in a stranger's doorway over $50. Carl had once made millions of children laugh. But in the end, he died not as Alfalfa, just as a man no one recognized, fighting over something small and losing everything. His former co-star said later, "None of us really made it. We all just grew up and disappeared." 18. Roy Kinnear, a fall that shouldn't have happened. Roy Kinnear was never a leading man, but his face was unforgettable. Round, expressive, and instantly sympathetic, he brought warmth and bumbling charm to every role he touched. From Help with the Beatles to his most iconic turn as Veruca Salt's indulgent father in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Kinnear made clumsy lovable. But beyond the laughs, he was a deeply respected actor. Serious about his craft, meticulous on set, and loved by nearly everyone he worked with. He wasn't flashy. He was dependable, a workhorse in an industry addicted to spectacle. That trust would cost him his life. In 1988, while filming The Return of the Musketeers in Toledo, Spain, Kinnear was asked to perform a seemingly simple scene, riding a horse across a cobblestone bridge. Roy wasn't a skilled rider, and the crew knew that. But corners were cut. Stunt doubles weren't used. Safety precautions were minimal. During the take, Kinnear's horse slipped. He was thrown violently to the ground, fracturing his pelvis. He was taken to the hospital, where he suffered a massive heart attack the next day. He died at 54. The director, Richard Lester, a longtime friend, was so shaken by the incident that he quit filmmaking altogether. Lawsuits followed. So did industry reforms. But none of it brought Roy back. A scene that should have been forgettable became fatal, and a man who made generations laugh met his end not with applause, but with the sound of hooves and stone. Todd 19. David Rappaport, the spotlight wasn't enough. David Rappaport stood just over 3 feet tall, but his presence filled any room or screen he entered. Witty, sharp, and intensely intelligent, he was best known for his role in Terry Gilliam's Time Bandits, where he led a troupe of time-traveling dwarves with both bravado and heart. He was a master of one-liners, equally at ease with comedy and existential melancholy. But behind the camera, David struggled. He was fiercely articulate about the limitations placed on actors with dwarfism, how the industry reduced them to sidekicks, props, or punchlines. And though he defied stereotypes with every role, the barriers remained. By the late 1980s, David was deeply depressed. He'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and the cycle of highs and devastating lows had become unbearable. In May 1990, he was cast in the television series Star Trek: The Next Generation for the episode The Most Toys. He began filming, but quickly withdrew, citing emotional distress. Days later, he was found dead in a wooded area in Los Angeles. He had taken his own life by gunshot. He was 38. Producers were forced to recast and reshoot the episode, but many involved in the production later said they never truly recovered from the loss. David's death wasn't a freak accident in the traditional sense, but it was tragic all the same. A life boxed in by other people's expectations, slowly crushed under the weight of being almost accepted. He once said in an interview, "I don't want to be a curiosity. I want to be an actor. Just an actor." Hollywood never figured out how to let him be that. 20. John-Erik Hexum, a joke that went too far. He had the looks of a Greek god and the charisma of a man who didn't know just how charming he truly was. John-Erik Hexum was one of the most promising television actors of the early 1980s, captivating audiences in Voyagers and later in Cover Up, where he played a secret agent masquerading as a male model. Tall, witty, and refreshingly grounded, John-Erik was on the fast track to stardom. But on October 12, 1984, that track was violently derailed, not by drugs or scandal, but by a single, catastrophic miscalculation. While on the set of Cover Up, a delay in shooting caused frustration. In an offhand attempt to lighten the mood, John-Erik picked up a Prop 44 Magnum revolver loaded with blanks, the kind designed to look real but not fire live bullets. He playfully placed it to his temple, smiled, and pulled the trigger. What he, and many others, didn't know is that blanks still discharge explosive gases and wadding at high speeds. At such close range, it's deadly. The force shattered part of his skull and drove bone fragments into his brain. He collapsed instantly. After several hours of surgery and 6 days on life support, he was declared brain dead. He was 26. His mother chose to donate his organs. And just like that, one of the brightest new stars in television became a cautionary tale. Crew members wept. Co-stars couldn't believe it had happened. A joke, an idle, senseless gesture had turned fatal. There were no enemies, no villains, just a moment, and then silence. He had everything, a friend said, and in 1 second he had nothing. 21. Jessica Savitch, drowned in darkness. She was the face of ambition in the 1980s, blonde, poised, and fiercely intelligent. Jessica Savitch broke barriers in journalism, becoming one of the first prominent female anchors on national television. With her icy stare and polished delivery, she was dubbed the Golden Girl of NBC. But behind that camera-ready confidence was a woman walking a tightrope between pressure and collapse. Her personal life was unraveling. Her second husband died by suicide just months after their wedding. Colleagues spoke of erratic behavior, late arrivals, emotional outbursts. Some blamed drugs, others burnout. Jessica brushed off the rumors and kept delivering the evening news with steely precision. But on October 23, 1983, her story ended not in scandal, but in a dark, flooded canal. After dinner in New Hope, Pennsylvania, with her boyfriend, New York Post executive Martin Fishbein, the two left in his car during a heavy storm. They took a wrong turn down a poorly marked road. The car plunged over a barrier into a narrow canal. Trapped inside, they both drowned, just feet from the surface. The vehicle wasn't discovered until hours later. Investigators believed they were alive for some time after the plunge, fighting to break free in pitch-black water. Jessica was 36. Her death stunned the media world. The woman who appeared so composed on screen had met a death that was chaotic, slow, and horrifyingly mundane. She gave voice to the news, one anchor said, but in the end, There was no one left to tell hers. A bright light extinguished in the murky quiet of a back road. No headlines. No second take. Tot 22. Steve Prefontaine crushed at full speed. He wasn't an actor, singer, or Hollywood face, but in the 1970s, Steve Prefontaine was a different kind of star. A long-distance runner with the heart of a rock star and the swagger of a rebel, Pre captivated America with his fearless style and raw emotion. He ran not just to win, but to defy. He was outspoken, electric, and unapologetically wild. He broke national records, filled stadiums, changed the way people looked at track and field. Nike's earliest success was tied to his name, and he was expected to dominate the 1976 Olympics. He had the world at his feet, and then it ended. Violently, pointlessly. On May 30th, 1975, after dropping off a friend following a post-meet celebration, Steve was driving through the streets of Eugene, Oregon. At a slight curve, his car hit a rock wall and flipped. Trapped underneath, his chest crushed by the weight of the vehicle, he suffocated before help could arrive. He was 24. Police found no alcohol beyond legal limits, no racing, no recklessness, just a loss of control. One turn too fast, one moment too far. The town of Eugene went into mourning. Thousands marched in silence. His funeral was attended by everyone from Olympians to shoe executives. A makeshift shrine sprung up at the crash site. It's still there. He had outrun everyone, but not fate. As his coach Bill Bowerman once said, some people create with words or with music or with a brush and paints. Steve created with running. He was a masterpiece. A masterpiece shattered in an instant. 23. Dar Robinson. The fall that didn't stop. You've seen Dar Robinson, even if you didn't know his name. He was the man who leapt from buildings, crashed through windows, and flipped motorcycles midair in countless Hollywood blockbusters. From Lethal Weapon to Stick, he was the most innovative and fearless stuntman of his time. Guinness World Records named him the highest-paid stunt performer in the world. He revolutionized the profession with new rigging systems, remote fall controls, and a level of precision unmatched. And he never got hurt on set. Dar was known for his obsessively safe practices. He rehearsed everything, calculated risks down to the second, and was often the first to say no if a stunt didn't feel right. That's what made his death so devastating. On November 21st, 1986, after completing a successful stunt for the film $1 Million Mystery, a high-speed motorcycle chase, Dar was riding back to base on a routine return trip. No cameras were rolling. No stunt was in progress. Yet somehow, he lost control of his motorcycle, veered off a cliff edge, and fell to his death. He was 39. There was no dramatic explosion, no applause, just silence and a team of crew members frozen in disbelief. The man who had fallen from the CN Tower and lived was killed by a quiet misstep on a dusty trail. He did the impossible for a living, one director said, and died doing the ordinary. His final stunt had already been filmed, and it was flawless. But it was the scene that no one expected that took him. 24. Ramón Novarro, killed by those he tried to help. In the 1920s, Ramón Novarro was one of Hollywood's first true heartthrobs, the dashing Latin lover who starred in Ben-Hur and rivaled Rudolph Valentino in fame. With sculpted features and soulful eyes, he commanded the screen in the silent era and made a successful transition into talkies, a rare feat at the time. But Novarro harbored a secret he couldn't afford to share publicly. He was gay, and in a deeply repressive Hollywood, that truth could destroy everything. So he retreated behind closed doors, aging out of stardom and into obscurity. By the 1960s, he was largely forgotten, living alone in a modest Los Angeles home, wealthy, discreet, and lonely. On October 30th, 1968, the night before Halloween, Novarro invited two young male hustlers, brothers Paul and Tom Ferguson, into his home. What followed wasn't seduction. It was slaughter. The brothers believed Novarro had a large stash of cash hidden in his house. When he refused to hand it over, they beat him to death with a metal cane, then shoved a candle and other objects down his throat in a cruel, mocking act of degradation. He was 69 years old. The killers stole $20. That was all. When his body was discovered the next day, the media pounced. Headlines screamed scandal. Few remembered the brilliant actor, only the lurid details of his death. The murder trial revealed a man who had spent his life seeking quiet dignity and was given the opposite in death. He deserved better, one colleague said, much better than that. a screen icon reduced to a headline, a rumor, a punchline, and eventually, a ghost. Ta 25. Ty Longley, trapped in fire and sound. He lived for the roar of the crowd and the scream of guitar strings. Ty Longley was the lead guitarist for Great White, a rock band that found success in the late 80s and early 90s with hits like Once Bitten, Twice Shy. Ty brought a soulful energy to the group, humble offstage, explosive on it. He wasn't a household name, but among fans, he was beloved. On the night of February 20th, 2003, Great White was performing at the Station nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island. The venue was small, packed, and lined with soundproofing foam. When the band's manager ignited pyrotechnics during the opening song, flames shot upward and caught. Within seconds, fire spread across the ceiling. Panic followed. People surged toward the exits, smoke thickening with each breath. The fire consumed the club in under 6 minutes. 100 people died that night. Ty Longley was one of them. Witnesses reported he initially escaped but went back, either to retrieve his guitar or help others. He never made it out again. His body was later found near the stage. He was 31. The tragedy shocked the nation and led to sweeping reforms in fire codes for nightclubs. But the pain lingered. Survivors spoke of screams in the dark, of crawling over others to breathe. Ty's family created a foundation in his name to support young musicians and to make sure people remember the man, not just the fire. He died doing what he loved, but no one should die that way.